Hey everyone, I'm going to be looking back and forth today. This is for chapter 15, and I'm looking back and forth because I'm looking at your discussion questions of what you wanted to know more about regarding psychological disorders. Okay, so the first one I have is about autism spectrum disorder, and it is honestly, it's one of the ones I've had the least experience with as a therapist. I worked with a few kids. It's also a complicated disorder. It is a spectrum. People can present different ways. And now we're learning that there's a lot of times we're not catching people with that disorder because of their high functioning, their masking. They've learned to mimic social engagements, things like that. It is characterized by certain deficits in social interactions, where some people have a hard time making eye contact. Some people have a hard time reading other people's emotions, like their facial expressions. Some people have a harder time expressing those emotions the way that people who are neurotypical would express the emotions. Back when I was younger, back when I was first starting out as a therapist, autism was not seen as a spectrum, it was a disorder. There was a very narrow category of behaviors, and they were much more on the severe end, where you would see people who have a much greater level of distress, much harder time with their daily lives, manage their daily lives on their own. Most actually probably couldn't live without some kind of supervision, intervention, something like that, because they would be engaging in things like self-injurious behavior, like biting themselves, making themselves throw up. Their verbal skills were really, really low if they had verbal communication skills. So now, knowing it's a spectrum, that's one reason why you have seen a rise in autism. It's not that there are more people with it, it is that we are diagnosing more people with it because the criteria has changed. And yes, with the deficits of communication, with the deficits of emotional regulation, you will see some characteristics like becoming very pattern oriented. That could look at like scheduling or making things into patterns. Most of the clients I've worked with autism do have a little bit of a harder time with transitions, like going from class to class, space to space. If they always do something at a certain time and it can't happen at that certain time, that can cause more stress. And with some, especially children, when they're under these stressors, they may be more likely to melt down. They may be more likely to act out by yelling or by being physically aggressive in some cases. And again, this is a spectrum. There is no quote unquote typical child or typical adult with autism. There you will see a whole host of things that you can see. There's sometimes also physical manifestations with autism, things like childhood arthritis, something called leaky gut, where there is a problem with the digestive system. I've seen a lot of food allergies. And if you look at treating autism interventions, most of the time is working with the environment, helping limit those stressors. Also, another one I just remembered is frequently tactile stimulation or any kind of stimulation. I don't know if we even have talked about it, but it's in your textbook about the inverted theory of arousal. We're saying that we all have a comfortable level of stimulation. Some of us like a lot of noise. Some of us hate a lot of noise. Same with light, same with temperature, same with even our clothes and the textures of our clothes and our food. And all of that stimulation, if we get overstimulated, it causes us stress. And if we're stressed, we're more likely to have lower emotional regulation. We're more likely to melt down. So that's also true for people with autism. It's just that more frequently they get overstimulated easier. And for some people that's noise, for some people that's bright lights, smells, temperature, and frequently texture of clothes, tactile, like itchy tags, elastic, synthetic fibers. You will see some people with autism who will only wear the same outfit. They may have several versions of that outfit, but they'll wear the same outfit every day because that feels right to them. You're not going to change this with somebody. We can learn coping techniques, but it's really more about helping set that person up for success in their environment and then teaching those coping techniques. Okay, another question I had was ADHD. And ADHD, a lot of people say ADD. ADD has actually been taken over into ADHD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And there's primarily hyper impulsive type, and then there's primarily inattentive type and combined type. I'll say most kids I've worked with were both. I would say the people who are the inattentive type frequently are not, they're less likely to be diagnosed. They're more likely to be underdiagnosed because they're not causing a problem for their teachers. They're also not getting in trouble at to the principal's office. They're not causing a problem for their parents, so they tend not to get diagnosed. What that looks like with the hyperactive and the impulsive, some people think that it is where they can't focus. Well, sometimes they become hyper-focused. But anyway, with the hyperactive, that would look like they're restless, they can't sit still. Impulsive, they interrupt, they can't wait their turn. They raise their hand and talk at the exact same time, or talk and then raise their hand. And they feel like they're being run by a motor, fidgety, all of those things. Now, not every fidgety person has ADHD. There's also other things that can make someone look fidgety. And then with the inattentive type, they're forgetful, they are easily distracted, they forget, they'll turn their work in, but they forget to put their name on it, or they do their homework, they forget to turn it in. Multiple step directions, oh no, one step at a time is much more effective with kids with ADHD. And as we get older, our attention span naturally gets larger. So with some adults, you may see a little bit less of the symptoms, or we also gain coping skills. If we have ADHD, we tend to not go into jobs where we have to always have our high attention span. And so, and then, like I said, there's that hyper focus. So some people say, well, I can't have ADHD because I can play video games for 3 hours. Well, you can get hyper focused, and it's not just video games. You can get hyper focused with cleaning, hyper focused with reading, hyper focused with any kind of task. So that's ADHD in a nutshell. Now, obviously, our little talk today is not going to be enough for you to be able to diagnose anybody. It takes years and years of studying. Okay, so another question was about mood disorders. Mood disorders, they used to call it depression and manic depression, and now it's unipolar depression and bipolar. So if you look at moods, they're a spectrum, right? We're happy, we're sad, we're in the middle. Well, and that's a normal mood. So when you have depression, you're going to have more of the lower mood and way lower mood, and you're not going to spend as much time in this level. And then with bipolar, you're going to have those periods of depression and then those periods of mania. It looks different for different people. Some people it is more of a cycle. Some people it's more of a jet up into the mania and then periods of depression. So it can look different for different people. But the characteristics. First, I'm going to start with depression. With depression, you're going to see changes in appetite and sleep. And eat, but with this, it's not like you're sleeping all the time so you're rested, or eating all the time so you're full. No matter how much or how little you eat, you don't feel really satisfied. You're really not feeling happy with your food. Same with sleep. It doesn't matter if you don't sleep at all or if you're sleeping for 12 hours a day, you're not feeling rested. And then you're having a decrease in energy, a decrease in activity level, a decrease in interest in things that you used to be interested in. And you're having an increase in what we call negative thoughts, thoughts of hopelessness, worthlessness, guilt. Some people that can look like anger, and those thoughts can be very, very disruptive. That is what can cause some people with depression to think about suicide, especially the worthlessness and hopelessness. If I'm worthless, then maybe people are better off without me. Or if I'm feeling hopeless, if there is no hope, then why? Okay, and then there is the mania side. So with the mania side, you're gonna have a decreased need of sleep. You could get 3 hours and be completely fine. You're gonna have an increased thoughts of euphoria, invincibility, creativity. This is why it's really tricky to treat, because if people go a little bit low on their medication in their system and they go into mania, then they're like, well, I don't need medication, this feels great. Because their thoughts are like, I'm invincible. I actually knew someone who had bipolar, and she said the reason the doctors prescribed her the medication was because she was too creative and too smart. And so anyway, so we have those irrational thoughts. And I know some people think that bipolar is more common in women. It is. It's not. It's pretty equally common with either gender. It also, now depression is more commonly diagnosed in women than men. But anyway, so, and depression is about 1 in 5 women and about 1 in 20 men, and bipolar disorder is about 14% of the population. Okay, back to mania. So with mania, you're also going to have increased activity, like increased purpose-driven activity, like going and organizing your whole house in a matter of minutes. I had a student who told me about his roommate who had bipolar, and she painted an entire mural in one night. So that would be increased purpose-driven behavior. You might also see increase in risky behavior like gambling or sexually acting out or doing drugs. Also pleasure-driven, and again, risky and pleasure-driven can frequently be similar. Okay, so, and then you will have random flight of ideas. And this isn't like someone who their thoughts kind of bounce around. This is like thoughts are everywhere, and there is no train, there is no string connecting the thoughts. They may have pressured speech where there are no commas, there are no periods, there are no breaths. And that is mania in a nutshell. And again, that's what makes it difficult to treat, because in the beginning it feels good, but with mania, either someone crashes and goes into depression, or they do something that is so risky or problematic that they get arrested. I knew a client who decided he was in love with someone and threw a cinder block through her window. So luckily got back on his medication and everything was fine. Okay, and this, let's see, I'm thinking I might want to make this, I think I'm gonna stop here, and I'm gonna talk about some other disorders in another video, because I know 14 minutes can be a little bit long, especially with memory, in my computer memory. Anyway, I will see y'all for part 2.